kaikille.
And now it's my great privilege to hand the microphone over to my old friend, Carl Bildt. Carl, take it away.
And I'm the one to fulfill the promise just given to deny you a drink for further 5 minutes or something like that. But there is hope. Otherwise, for drink, I mean. Otherwise, I have to say that this morning, this day started rather badly. The sun was shining, that was a good thing. But then we had Victor coming here and pointing at that particular thing as some sort of symbol for where we're heading. That was not the most uplifting start of a year's conference that I have attended. And then we had Neil, of course, with Apocalypse, coming with the one prediction after the other, essentially saying there was a 1 in 6 probability, I think, that before the end of this century, we will all be dead. That's fairly certain in itself, but that everyone else will be gone as well. And then, of course, there was the comment about Ukraine, that Ukraine is just one zone of the one disaster after the other. Hopefully, or I'm happy to say that the day continued slightly better than it started. Because even if we have been dealing with fairly major challenges, to put it very mildly, there have been both concern but element of hope. But I think it's also been interesting this day that it's been less than it normally is. The geopolitics that many of us have been spending a large part of our lives with, but with global challenges that are really immense concern. We are 18 months into a huge pandemic of a nature that no one of us have ever encountered. In history, there has been far worse, but it was a bloody long time ago, and that memory has been lost. And we are still, in my opinion, only half the way through this pandemic, and until everyone is safe, no one is safe. We are working through the Greek alphabet of variants. We started with Alpha, we are with Delta. There might be unpleasant surprises on the way to Omega until we get this under control. And then climate, of course. We heard, I think, rightly so, fairly scary assumptions on what might happen. And we heard also predictions on the magnitude of the change that is necessary in a fairly short period of time, be that 10 years or 20 years or 30 years. And are we ready for that? Are the political systems ready for that? I think those questions were essentially left hanging in the air. And then tech. There was a discussion on sons doing games on Facebook and their mothers being slightly surprised by that. I think that's a fairly human development that we see all over the world these days. But I mean, Facebook is yesterday's news for the new generation. They're all TikTok, which most of us here don't understand at all. And I would say that 5 years from now, TikTok might well be yesterday's news, and we are somewhere else. In the world of artificial intelligence, of synthetic biotechnology, which is going to be quite something, or quantum computing, whatever that will mean, and the different standards that are developing in different parts of the world. If we take these things together, it becomes quite challenging. If we find a world that is more divided in terms of politics, we see tension building up between the different powers, at the same time as we see the imperative of everyone working together. There's no way that we can beat a pandemic if not everyone is working together. There's no way that we can handle climate change if not everyone is working together. And we see a situation where there is less of global cooperation than it's been for a long time. Geopolitics was here in our discussion. Afghanistan, I think it's too early to tell the consequences of that. But we are clearly living, Mike McFaul say we can't predict the future. I agree with that. Look back just at the decades that have passed. 1991, some of us still remember it, the fall of the Soviet Union, a bipolar world that disappeared. There was a unipolar world when there was no limits to the power and the ambitions of the United States. 20 years ago, this day, that came to a rather brutal point with 9/11, where even the most powerful nation that the world has ever seen was reminded of the very distinct limits of its possibility of shaping its own future. And then 2011, to take 10-year jumps, the sudden, I think someone said, the belief that the Renaissance had come to the Muslim world and to the Arab world. And that ended, of course, in grief and pain and refugee streams and wars and a lot of other things. And now, 2021, the global challenges that we are facing, the pandemic of a nature we have never seen in modern history, and climate change, a challenge of a magnitude far greater than I think perhaps mankind has seen for centuries. And then China, that has been there throughout the debates. And I would say the big issue that is there is whether 1870 is going to be repeated. You might ask what happened in 1870. Well, 1870 was the last big shift. It was when Great Britain ceded the position of being the #1 economic power in the world to the rising power of the United States. And the question is, will in the next few years, within a decade, China, by all sorts of measurements, they already have to some extent, but by all sorts of measurements, surpass the United States as the #1 economic power of the world? I think it's highly likely that will happen. And the big question that is hovering over all of these discussions is, what does that mean for us, for the new #2 in that particular case, and for us that are still going to be #3 or #4 or #5 or whatever down that particular list. So it's been a day, started badly, had some hope, some optimism, and some fairly major challenges. And I think the only proper answer to all of those questions left hanging in the air is the one that Neil gave. Let's go and get a drink. And dinner is served, I understand, in the right wing of the arsenal. Off to that.